Hey everyone, welcome to the Pathfinder Adventures Ahead panel. I'm James Jacobs. I'm the creative director for Pathfinder, and why don't I have my other two illustrious panel participants introduce themselves as well?
Hi, I am Jessica Catalan. I am the Starfinder Society developer. I also run the Starfinder Bounties line, and I am a frequent Starfinder and Pathfinder freelancer.
And I am Mike Kimmel, Pathfinder Society developer, and also a pretty frequent freelance author for mostly Pathfinder and some Starfinder as well.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we're here today to talk about Pathfinder Adventures Ahead, Pathfinder Adventures that are coming soon, coming a little bit after that, etc. I'm going to talk a little bit for the first 10, 20 minutes about what's coming out now and what's coming out in the next several months. And then we will talk a little bit more about just how we create the adventures and how we maybe, share some tips on adventure creation, etc. So to start with, the big new adventure path that's out right now is Bloodlords. And this is an adventure path where it's set in this undead nation of Geb, and this is an adventure path where you can play undead. So let's see if we have any of the images for Bloodlords coming up. And yeah, this is just a day in the life in Geb. Just guy walking around with a skeleton cart, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that could be one of your player characters, or maybe not. Anyway, so in Bloodlords, you start out. It's a full first to 20th level adventure, and the first adventure you start out, punching, zombie cows and stuff like that. I think that's in the next panel or the next illustration we've got to share. And yeah, there we go. The cover, fighting undead farm life. Start from humble beginnings in Zombie Feast, but by the time you get to the end of Bloodlords, you're going to be kind of maybe even reshaping regional politics and doing all sorts of just super high level stuff. We'll have more to say about Bloodlords later on in the seminar for sure. Bloodlords is going to go through the rest of the year and finish up, and then during that time, we're also going to have a new adventure coming out in the standalone line. It's sort of a new adventure, sort of an old adventure. And that's Crown of the Kobold King. So people who have been with Paizo from the start will remember this. This is the very first standalone adventure we did for our, at the point, call it Game Mastery line. And it was a sort of a classic go into the dungeon, fight kobolds adventure. We did a couple of sequels to it. And then the standalone adventure was it was basically going places where we didn't go in the adventure path and gave us a chance to look at other parts of the campaign setting of Galarian. With Crown of the Kobold King, though, we wanted those adventures were originally published for even before Pathfinder was its own RPG. And we had plans on bringing it back and making sort of a big, fancy new edition of it in first edition Pathfinder. We had one of the original authors, Nick Logue, write an entire new dungeon level for it. And it was, I guess, waiting in the wings to start development. And it just never quite happened. We kept running into their plans and so that lost level underneath Drosker's Crucible sort of lay hidden on my hard drive for like half a decade. So come along this year, we're going to be finally publishing that lost level along with all of the other dungeon levels and adventures kind of compiled into one big 128-page adventure for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And I think we got the cover for that one coming up next. That's a placeholder. That was the original cover for Crown of the Kobold King, King Merlocrep, and here's the new version of him in all of his koboldly glory, giving out orders and expecting to be obeyed by all of his minions. This is going to be an interesting adventure because it's the first time these adventures have all existed in their own sort of self-contained element, whereas in previous incarnations they all had their own plots and getting into the dungeon, and this one it's basically all at once. So we had to build a new surrounding story for it that really leans into the idea of this powerful crown that this kobold discovered and what sort of trouble he gets into, and So that one will be a first level adventure. Your characters will end up probably 7th level by the end of it. And then we've got another thing coming out about the same point, which is also sort of a return to the yesteryears. And that's this enormous project that I've been working on pretty much for the last 3 years. And that is the hardcover edition of Kingmaker. And if you're at the show, I believe they have all of these out there for people to look through or to ogle at. That's not nearly everything that is involved in it, but it's the bulk of the campaign. Right there down the middle, you've got the Kingmaker hardcover, which is the entire adventure path expanded significantly by hundreds of pages. The main adventure path book is 640 pages. It's the same size as the core rule book, for those of you who are looking for comparisons. We've also got the Kingmaker Companion Guide, which is just above it. That's another 128 pages of additional material, largely focused on a lot of the companions from the Owlcat video game. Amiri, Knock Knock, Lindsay, Tristan, several others. Each get their own stat block, their own set of feats and spells and stuff that they can teach the player characters, and their own little story adventures. So there's 7 more adventures that you can use to expand your Kingmaker campaign. And then we've got a bestiary of all of the monsters and NPCs and stuff presented from this version in first edition Pathfinder and in 5th edition rules. And then we got a couple over on the left, the collector's editions. And there's map packs, and there's character folios, and there's a GM screen. There's all sorts of other content for this enormous adventure path. As it's very much, even more so than ever, it's a true sandbox. I mean, if your player characters go through and try to do every single encounter in this 640-page book, even without touching the extra adventures in the other volume, they're going to hit 20th level well before they get to the end of the adventure. So there's a lot of content in there for you to explore. If you played it before, if you played the video game before, you'll see a lot of familiar faces and scenarios. But there's some brand new stuff in there too. I should point out that I'm going to try to stay away from spoilering stuff in this panel, but spoilers will come out here and there. One spoiler, for example, is in the hardcover version, we're going to reveal the dungeons below Candlemere Castle, which we've only hinted at in both the original publication and in the video game. We've never really gone there for fun, for real. So that is an exploration that takes place during the campaign as well. Kingmaker should be out really soon. It's hard to keep track of all of this stuff. When it goes off to the printer, I'm like, oh, okay, on to the next one. But that one should be out, I believe, within the next couple of months at least, finally. And there is, before we get to the brand new stuff, there's one more compilation that is on the horizon for, I believe, next year, and that is the hardcover version of the Ruby Phoenix Adventure Path. This is one that we just recently published. It's sort of you start out on this island, and you sort of battle royale, Hunger Games style-esque adventure where you have to prove your worth, prove that you're worthy of taking part in this tournament, the Ruby Phoenix tournament. And we had a lot of fun updating and compiling the Abomination Vaults into a hardcover format. And this one is coming a lot soon too as well. So if you missed out on that, you'll be able to dive in and get your competition urges all in there. Like, I don't know if these are they look like they're fighting. They're not fighting each other. So anyway, that's the Ruby Phoenix tournament. Then going beyond that into 2023, we're going to be talking about 2 adventure paths that are coming out in 2023. The first one is a 3-part one called Gatewalkers. And this one is something that has been worked on we're right in the middle of finishing up right now. And so in fact, just before this seminar started, I just finished off stuff that I was working on for part 3 of Gatewalkers. In this adventure path, you are basically characters who wake up with missing time. You've been gone. You don't know what's been going on. You've got what's called a missing moment. And the adventure path is about you working with other people who have had these weird missing time happen to them. You're working for this professor from a town in Ustalov who's trying to put the pieces together and all of that. And you're going to travel to different continents and even dare I say, different worlds entirely to track down what's going on. Different worlds, different regions, all sorts of exciting new locations to explore here. Gatewalkers, I think we got the picture of how it basically starts out here with a intrepid adventurer finding a strange portal and being drawn through into something beyond. There's a lot of tie-in stuff with Dark Archive in this one, and it's very much sort of a conspiracy, sort of X-Files-esque, truth is out there type campaign where you're trying to solve this mystery with whatever is going on. And I'm trying not to spoil too much, but it might be aliens. I think we got the cover for the first volume coming up as well. These 3 volumes, you'll start at first level and go up to about 11th level. The first one is by James L. Sutter. Second one is Jason Keeley, I believe. And then the third one is by myself. And it's going to be, there's a lot of weird, wild stuff in here. I mean, it's for lower level, goes from 1st to 10th level, but the storyline and the things that happen in this are very, very out of this world epic. Just, I was kind of surprised. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. I've known James Sutter for decades and should be surprised about the types of things he put in there, but it's good stuff. So I see a couple of questions already popping in the chat. We'll get to those in a bit. But there's one more thing I wanted to talk about going forward, and that's the adventure path that just got announced a couple days, or yesterday, I believe, by Eric. And that's the Stolen Fate adventure path. Stolen Fate's coming out hot on the heels of Gatewalkers. It'll, I think, launch 2023 in April. It's a 3-part adventure path for high level. You'll start at 11th level and go all the way up to 20th. I think we've got some thematic art for Stolen Fate here that we're working on. Let me sidetrack real quick there about, there's Stolen Fate. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on with the Harrow deck. We've done this stuff before, back in Curse the Crimson Throne and Adventure, and the Carrying Crown Adventure Pass, and also in the Adventure, the Harrowing. And this is a new adventure path that dives deep into the lore and mythos of the Harrow deck. And we don't have any new art for this one yet. This one's just getting started. And I've seen some sketches for some of the covers, and of course they look delightful. But this adventure path starts with your 11th level characters discovering Harrow cards that they don't remember how they got. They just show up in their possessions. And as you start looking at these weird Harrow cards, you can realize that they've got weird magic powers. And you have this vision that something out there is going on with this new powerful deck. And you start out basically in the near Absalom, city of Absalom, and you feel this urge to go to Absalom and start tracking down these missing cards. The overall theme of the adventure path is sort of a treasure hunt, where you're trying to track down all these scattered magic Harrow cards. And as you start gathering them together, you find out where they came from, what caused them to scatter, and start building your own demi-plane based on the Harrow. And that sort of serves your party as a sort of a home base. It's called the Harrow Court. And depending upon which cards you discover and which ones you focus on, you can manifest different powers, and you can also manifest different elements inside your new domain. And that's going to be really handy because unlike most of our adventure paths where we can say that's the Irison one, or that's the Varisia one, or that's the Mwangi Expanse one, Stolen Fate goes all over the place. And quite literally, you're going to, I think you go to maybe 4 or 5 different continents just in the first adventure. You're not going to stay at any one of them long, but these cards are all over the place as you start tracking them down. And so we're going to a lot of new places, revisiting a lot of interesting older locations that have played key roles in the past. And the whole plot is basically, I don't want to spoil too much, but the idea is that there's a group out there that sees the Age of Lost Omens as a cosmic mistake. The whole idea that prophecy is no longer reliable is something they need to fix. And we've dabbled with plots like this before with the Harbingers, a group that has tried to basically go through, and they see these prophecies don't happen. They try to make them happen. And And that didn't work, of course. And so this new group realizes, well, we can't fix what's already happened, but we can fix the future. We can steal fate from everybody else, put everything in one direction, and then everything will be fine, right? And as I've learned, as we've all learned, player characters do not like to be told what to do. And so this is very much the adventure path where you, the player characters, make sure that for all RPGs going forward in Pathfinder, your players continue to have the agency and freedom of choice to make their own fate. Again, this will go all the way to 20th level. I just started working on this one. The authors, the first one is called The Choosing. That's written by Ron Lundeen. The second volume is called The Destiny War. That's written by Chris Sims. And the third adventure is called The Worst of All Possible Worlds. And that's being written by Luis Sloza. And those will, again, go from April to June. By the time we get to the last few levels in that one, you'll be up to 20th level. And I'm anticipating there's going to be a lot of like secret hints about, it's about the future, but it's also going to be a place where I'm going to try to weave in a lot of like hints as to what's coming out in the next several years for Pathfinder. So we'll see how well I can do that. But it's sort of your player characters are going to be, to a certain extent, manipulating what's coming and allowing it to happen. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have actually a brand new hero deck as well. Brand new art, I think, is being done like in a bigger format, like a larger tarot card format. And I've seen some of that art coming in. It's neat seeing a familiar image like, the beating or the avalanche or the cyclone, all these classic cards originally envisioned by Kyle Hunter. But seeing them done in a new art, just as you see tarot decks done in all sorts of different art styles, it's going to be a lot of fun. So one element I wanted to also spoil a little bit about this adventure path is each of these cards you discover in Stolen Fate has their own powers. So you'll have like a passive effect and an activation effect. And as you start gathering these cards up, you'll build a hand. And a hand of these cards, 5 of them, is basically an invested item. So you can basically use these 5 cards as you start building them up to customize your own, basically your own powerful, almost artifact level magic item that you can, by mixing and match. It's sort of a deck building element to a magic item. And it'll be a lot of fun just using your actual hero cards to like, here's my magic item. I got them all right here, my actual hand, and it should be a lot of fun. So that's Stolen Fate, and that'll bring us all the way through toward next year's Gen Con. We'll be announcing a lot of the other stuff coming out the rest of the year at some point between now and then. There's 1 or 2 in particular I'm super excited about. We're creeping up on Pathfinder 200. We've got we'll certainly having more standalone adventures planned. There's one in works right now that is going to be released in 2023 that is something that I'm excited about. It's exploring a place that we haven't really explored yet, but and I should stop there before I spoil something I shouldn't. So let's talk now about adventures. All 3 of us wrote for Bloodlords, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So let's go ahead and just start with you, Mike. Talk about like what you did for Bloodlords, what your adventure writing technique is like, and just let us know what goes into a adventure for you.
Yeah, so I wrote Volume 1, which is the one that just released for Gen Con just now, Zombie Feast, Volume 1 of the Bloodlords Adventure Path, which is my first Adventure Path volume. I've done lots of other much shorter adventures as a Pathfinder and Starfinder Society freelance author, and then, of course, now as the Pathfinder Society developer. So this was a much larger bite of adventure writing, so to speak. Sorry, the entire thing is filled with like food-related motifs and some puns, so you'll forgive me or not for the food jokes. But yeah, it was a much bigger project than I was used to writing, so challenging in that way. And also challenging in that, as you know, Bloodlords is an adventure path for, we say, less than good-hearted characters. Your standard adventure will expect people to be probably not evil, and especially in Pathfinder Society, my usual work. we expect people to definitely not be evil. You are probably good or neutral. And in Bloodlords, you almost certainly are not good. You might be, and that would be a fun way to play through the adventure. A bit of a challenge, but you're very likely lawful evil or some other flavor of evil, or maybe lawful neutral. Geb as a whole is, ruled by Geb and by the Bloodlords, and is very much a sort of totalitarian state, and you are part of that system at the beginning of this adventure path. Your first level, so you're doing kind of literally going and fixing up a farm to start things off. So you're not running anything yet, but the expectation is that you're working your way up among the Bloodlords and building relationships and making lots of friends, maybe making plenty more enemies, and steadily becoming part of this ruling system in Geb. And so it was challenging as my first adventure path to take on something that is humongous, first of all, right? It's 5-6 times longer in terms of word count than your typical scenario, but also the expectations of who the characters are is that they're probably not heroes, and so kind of writing an adventure to motivate those kinds of characters was very different. But there are sort of very similar things, and I'll talk a little bit about how I approach adventures. Is you get your outline from the developer as a freelance author, and the most important thing for me to look at in that outline, or if I'm creating an outline as a developer, is kind of what's the starting point of the adventure and what's the expected end point. And my job as an author is to fill in how they get from where they start to where they need to be by the end. As a game master running your own campaign, you might not necessarily have expectations for where your characters are going to end up by 4th level. But as part of an adventure path where I know the characters are going to be playing many more adventures beyond what I've written, there's very specific, things they need to accomplish within this volume. And so my job is basically to sit and say, okay, this is what they need to know by the end of the adventure. This is who they need to have met and dealt with one way or another, and go from there in filling out all of those pieces of it. And it doesn't matter if the characters are good or evil or anything like that in that way. So that's what I sort of tried to focus on, was just what are all the pieces of the puzzle that I need to fit together, and how do I motivate the characters to move forward. So this adventure is very much laying the groundwork for the rest of the adventure path. The intrigue is just getting started. You're just sort of trying to figure out what you think is a much smaller localized problem in a city called Greydirge, which is out in the hinterlands of Geb, near a bunch of farms that are worked by zombies, which are part of the responsibility of the Reanimators faction, which is part of the Bloodlords. Have these different factions which you can become part of over the course of the adventure path, or become enemies with, of course, because of all the political intrigue that'll be going on. So it starts off as this very localized problem where you might not necessarily think that it's going to become this big nationwide and even international issue later on. But it lays the groundwork for lots of things to come, and there are lots of opportunities to develop relationships, maybe burn some bridges if that's more your style, and just get into the mood of this nation of the undead. So that's kind of a general introduction to Zombie Feast. I can keep talking and just go through all the contents in here. It's a bunch of really cool and some really gross stuff. But I'm happy to take questions too from you, James, or from chat. If people want to know more about Bloodlords or adventure writing or Zombie Feast.
Cool. let's actually jump forward, Jessica, to hear about your time serving the Bloodlords, I guess. And then if you guys have, I'm gathering questions from the chat too that we'll start answering a bit.
So I wrote book 6 for Bloodlords, which is the Ghost King's Rage. It's 18th through 20th level, which means that pretty much anything I'm going to say is a spoiler. So this is your spoiler warning. I'm sorry. So at the time that I was writing this, I wasn't working at Paizo yet. I was a full-time freelance author. This is one of the very last adventures I did before being hired, and I was writing it concurrently with the Starfinder adventure Redshift Rally, which is out this month. And I had just wrapped up working on Book of the Dead, which I was also a cover author for. So I had lots going on and some other projects too. So I first heard about this one when Ron Lundeen got in contact with me to ask about Vitala Rana. One of my Book of the Dead assignments was to take the first edition Vitala and the Psychic Vampire and fuse them both together into one new take on the Psychic Vampire concept, purposely taking it in a new direction when it was appropriate. So Ron needed to know what I had planned, as he was going to make this cool new AP in Geb, and one of the most important political figures in Geb is Chancellor Kemneti, who is already canonically a Vitala. So I told him what I had planned, and off he went. And about a week later, he contacted me again and asked if I wanted to write something with a Vitala Rana in it. I was really busy at the time, but I'm a sucker for a good spooky adventure, and I adore vampires. They're one of my very favorite classic horror monsters, sorry. And also, I'd never worked with Ron before, really. He'd never hired me for an adventure. I had written some back matter monsters in some previous APs, and Patrick Rini had given me a Pathfinder adventure to write for Quest of the Frozen Flame, which I had just finished turning in like a month before or something. So this was my first chance really to work with Ron. So I told him I was in. And then I read the outline, and there is no adventure in this series I could have possibly wanted more. I adore psychopomps. So they're one of my very favorite parts of Pathfinder and Starfinder lore. I really rarely have a chance to work with them. I got to write like the Psychopomp Sorcerer Bloodline for Advanced Player's Guide. I got to bring Psychopomps into Starfinder and Alien Archive 4. And occasionally I get to dabble in like Boneyard Pharasma, kind of Psychopomp adjacent things, like the Soul Warden archetype for Book of the Dead, stuff like that. But this adventure had Psychopomps. And not just a bit. I got to write a soul heist in the Boneyard. I got to write an article on Narakis, a Psychopomp usher that there was a little bit of information on. And I was ecstatic. This is like definitely the adventure in the series that was meant for me. So, Ghost King's Rage. So, by the time this book starts, you have kind of brought the big dastardly plot thing you're trying to accomplish to an end. You have, your heroes, you did it, bravo. But the mastermind behind this has gone to ground. He is hiding in some kind of extraplanar lair, not quite in the material plane, and you can't get at him. Geb can't get at him. Geb can't even track down the entrance to this guy's hidey hole. And in this book, it is really your job to find him and kill him. And not just kill him, because killing him recklessly will not be enough. You have to destroy this person. So, first you gotta find him. How are you gonna get to him? And the only person who knows is dead. Not even undead, just straight up dead. So this is an ancient, tattered soul in the Boneyard. And that's a little bit beyond your reach. So you have to learn a little bit about the soul from an old complex that once belonged to a secret cult of Pharasmans. You get to enter the Boneyard. You, a bunch of people who work with undead, might be undead, and might make undead. You get to go to the Boneyard. So you're welcome, have fun. And once there, you have to literally steal this soul. This is a soul heist. It's my favorite part of the adventure. I am super biased. I love it. Third, once you finally accomplish this, you have to collect some ritual components for Gib. So he can, scan the memories of the soul and see, learn what you need to know. So this is another part of the adventure I found really interesting to write. Usually when you do these sort of fetch quests, this get 3 magic items, complete the magic ritual type stuff, usually you're low level. But not now. This is a super high level scavenger hunt. So not only did I get to take a look at our setting and undead and consider things that you might actually have to collect, so for like this kind of ritual, things that make sense, but also ensure that this is a fun challenge for a group of really high level PCs, and that is hard. They have lots of abilities, lots of workarounds, and you should be able to use them, but I still need it to be functional, right? So add to that there are components you need to acquire, but for each there's a bonus thing you can do or thing you can acquire for Geb. So for each, I also need this additional complication or additional component. And because I adore a bit of a moral dilemma when appropriate, these additional things are not always easy to acquire. So I'm going to spoil an example of one of these, which is Berline's last gasp. Berline is a character you meet right at the beginning of this adventure path. She helps set you on the path to becoming a Bloodlord. Of everyone you met in this AP, she's probably the person who's been nicest to you. So if Geb asks you for her last gift, her dying breath for this extra ambition of his, what do you do? Like, do you kill her? You don't have to. You can ignore Geb's request. Do you want to ignore Geb's request? If you're playing a bunch of evil characters, maybe, you can just go kill her. Or maybe you could try to bring her back as undead. Does that work? Maybe if you have her permission, do you need it? Does it make it better if you do have it? What if she doesn't want to cooperate? Or as high-level PCs, maybe you find a completely other way, right? Can you make it so she just never has to breathe? But how can you ensure that works? So I wanted to take a lot of really way out there, over-the-top things that you could do and just make sure there were lots of ways to get things done, but also that it's challenging. Not everything is easy. The things that you have to acquire don't require like evil deeds, right? You're not, by now, you're probably kind of evil, let's face it, but you don't have to be, right? You have to be non-good, but some of these other harder ones are more of a challenge. So and then you get to bust into the bad guy's realm, maybe try to destroy him, but that is a big challenge in itself, not just for the location that this occurs in, but also how you need to take him down. This is not a straightforward, stalk the halls, take down the minions, kill the villain type mission. It is more complicated than that. And I really found working on Bloodlords to be a challenge. Bloodlords is not the AP for everyone. It is a hard tone to work with. And I've done quite a few, spookier or darker adventures before, particularly in organized play. But this one was different. I also found it really rewarding, though, and I'm excited to see how people react to this one.
Cool, thanks. I kind of split the difference between you two, I guess. I wrote the fourth part right down the middle. Kind of got in at the last minute. The Ghoul's Hunger. The thing that I was most excited about writing that one is I got to play around with a character that I created ages ago I think it was Into the Darklands, Cortash Kane, who's this super powerful ghoul necromancer guy that runs this very much inspired by Clark Ashton Smith's City of the Ghouls down deep underground in the Darklands. And there's a lot of political machinations going on in the Ghoul's Hunger where you kind of have to Cortash Kane comes to visit Geb, and Geb isn't a big fan of him, and there's kind of a back and forth, and your player characters get sort of stuck in the middle of that political strife that's going on. There's some. It's. I've always loved writing like the darker stuff too myself, like horror and all of that. But I think it's really important to get in this element of like whimsy and weirdness as well to kind of counterbalance it. So one of the things I came up with for Cortash Kane, for example, is he lives down in the Darklands, and he doesn't have to breathe. So when he comes up to the surface, he's like, I'm not going to breathe your inferior surface air. And he doesn't breathe. He doesn't talk. When he does want to talk, he uses like this little head and torso of a ghoul that he kind of carries around with him and telepathically makes that talk for him. And that way he doesn't taint his undead lungs with inferior surface air. So it's fun leaning into just this element of what happens if undeath is the norm rather than life. And there's certain elements in the adventure where if you're playing a ghoul that you may have some different opportunities or ideas on how to solve some of these encounters that you're put into. But anyway, let's get on to some questions real quick. There's a couple I can answer real quick, and then we'll start tossing them around. The Silver Knight asks, what are the differences and changes from the original to the anniversary version of Kingmaker? So the original Kingmaker covered 6 volumes, and the adventures were each about half the length of each of those volumes. So that's about 350 words of adventure. The hardcover is 640 words, so it's kind of double the size. So there's a lot of new content in this thing. There's a new start. There's a new ending. There's 2 brand new adventures, one at about 5th, 6th level, one at about 16th, 17th level. And the whole thing's been reorganized and kind of brought all together. Wow. I kind of look at, just like when I updated Rise of the Runelords and Curse of the Crimson Throne, I looked at all of the reader and player feedback as playtest feedback and brought a lot of that in. I brought a lot of the content from Owlcat's video game in, and working with just a huge number of authors, many of which were brought in with my friend Jason Nelson, who runs Legendary Games, took the first stab at gathering all of this stuff together into one new adventure. So there is a lot of new stuff. The kingdom rules have been completely rewritten. One of the big changes there is that in first edition, since first edition, your gear and everything and your abilities are really kind of gated by your wallet. You know, it's how much does a magic item cost that determines how powerful it is. In second edition, it's more gated to your level. So it's not so much that a 10th level item costs more. It does, but it's a 10th level item. So that is the metric by which you determine whether or not it belongs in your character's hands. And so the new version of the kingdom rules treat the kingdom basically as a character. It's going to gain levels, it gains feats, it has its own set of different skills, and the entire party controls how that works as you level up your kingdom alongside of all of your characters leveling up. And so that's a pretty big change too. There's quite a lot. So I it's more than I can really get into here, but that's some of the top line changes. Ezekiru asks, any word on Dead God's Hand coming out in 2023? Yeah, it's not coming out in 2023. I don't think. I've been talking with Eric about it on and off. It's something that I've played through and I've read through a lot of it. It's got a lot of neat stuff in there. There's some really potentially great potential for it to pull back the curtain on Erodin a bit more than even we've done before. So hopefully we'll find a place for it in the future. That the standalone adventure line isn't going anywhere. I'm pushing hard for us to keep doing content for it, and that will definitely be something that'll come out at some point. Probably not 2023. I'm looking at that schedule right now, and I'm not seeing it on there. I'm seeing a couple of other adventures up there, but now ask again next Gen Con, I guess, and I'll give you an update. H2OSW asked, are there any towns or locations got the love that Otari got? Yeah, absolutely. Otari is a town that I created, or I fleshed out for Abomination Vaults and the Beginner's Guide. And it was sort of a last minute thing that I kind of got tapped to do this because we needed to know information about Otari when it first got mentioned with, people living there and all that in the Game Mastery Guide. So I sort of jumped the gun in building there. And I sort of took the same path there I took with Sandpoint, which is the very first town I created for Pathfinder back in Rise of the Runelords. And so Sandpoint has definitely got a lot of a love for it back in first edition. And it's also like Otari. Both of these are towns that I drew from my hometown, Point Arena, for a lot of the information. Like there's a lighthouse outside of Point Arena. There's a lumber flume. Back in the day, they used to shoot trees down the mountainside into the ocean. And so that's one of the best ways I've found to give a lot of like really fun background lore to a city or a town or a village that you're building for your setting, is to look to your own where you grew up, bring in like a lot of like the old quirks about the locals there and stuff like that. You don't want to transplant them entirely, but just take inspiration from that. Mike, for Grey Dirge, did you do much work developing Grey Dirge in this way, or building a lot of information there for the players to explore? It's a different sort of story, I guess, since you're not necessarily good guys.
Yeah, well, actually, what you were just saying about drawing inspiration from real world cities, like for Grey Dirge, it's this very dense, packed city in a wall of stone and bones. It's literally like an ossuary city made of bones from like ancient soldiers who died in battle long ago. And I have traveled a little bit to some very old cities, like Fez in Morocco, and sort of drew inspiration on just like the denseness of the place, and just obviously it's nothing like a city of the dead or anything like that, but just in terms of like thinking about the layout and just the way the city sort of was shaped and put together, I was imagining a lot in my head, a lot of the very old, almost maze-like areas of the old Medina, the old cities, and absolutely drew inspiration from like real places, and was looking at all kinds of like there's famous tanning businesses in some of those old cities in the real world, and I was thinking, well, what would that be like in a city of undead who use the living people and their bones? Well, would they also have like skin processing, businesses and things like that? And so like there was some stuff where I was just like, didn't quite come out and say it in the description of the city, but like definitely implied that like, yeah, this is kind of like a really messed up city of really dead people. But was definitely sort of drawing inspiration from real places.
Nice. It strikes me that with Crown of the Kobold King coming out in its new version, we've got Falcon's Hollow as another early example of a town that we really detailed a lot of. The thing that's interesting about Falcon's Hollow, as opposed to Sandpoint or Otari, is that it's not really a nice place, and there's a lot of really just awful people living there, and that's sort of the way that things go there. One of my goals with Atari and Sandpoint was I wanted to build a town that your characters wanted to live in and to protect and to be invested in. And with Falcon's Hollow, it's more of a case of we want to get powerful enough so we can get away from this place. And so that's also an interesting way you can take things. Let's see here. Jessica, there's a question I think for you. Will from America wants to know more about Kemnabe's personality and motivations.
Oh, that is really spoilery. I was going to avoid that.
Well, they asked. It's not our fault if we spoiled.
Let me think. So, what I will say is that for a long time, Geb has been not really running his own country, right? Like Razny was doing it. He's just kind of lounging, being sad for himself, missing next. But, now that he is taking a stronger interest in running the country, that leaves someone who is, the most powerful Bloodlords who are in Geb, right? People like Chancellor Kemnabe, suddenly don't have as much control as they did before. All of a sudden, Geb is actually paying attention, actually cares what's going on, and maybe you don't have as much freedom as you used to. So in a lot of ways, those people who have been actually ruling this country for a really long time, maybe they think they were doing just a fine job, or maybe, they could have done a better job than Geb's going to do. What's he going to do, right? Like, drive us back into war? So I would say people like Chancellor Kimnevy are driven a lot by pride, a lot by the things that they could lose. Kimnevy himself, as a Vitalarana, can curate himself, right? He can take memories, he can feed on the memories and skills of other people by feeding on them and make that a part of himself, right? If you can, over how many centuries, perfect yourself in that way, I'm pretty sure there's not many people you think you can do your job better than you. So in a lot of ways, he is incredibly, incredibly, I don't want to say pompous. Let's not go with that. Very proud. Let's let's go with that. And definitely in Geb, I mean, power is how you are safe, if nothing else. And nobody who has worked their centuries of life to become a very powerful bloodlord, or really powerful, important person in that nation, wants to see any shred of that gone.
Cool, thanks. Shan Wolf 01 asks, will we get a Hell's Rebels style adventure path that challenges the Bloodlords? Probably not. We've just spent half a year in Geb with a lot of Bloodlord stuff, so we're going to be going other places for the next couple of years at least. Also, there's a certain element that if we solve all of the horrors and evils and dangers and perils in Galarian, there's not going to be anything else for you to adventure with, and we need to have a certain level of villainy in the world preserved. And so one of the things that we want to do with Geb is it's also a very uniquely Golarian Pathfinder location with the way that it's set up. It's something that we want to kind of keep as is. Cheliax is a similar one where, I mean, we did a Hell's Rebels. It was set in Cheliax, but you'll notice that Hell's Rebels doesn't destroy or take out all of Cheliax. It just converts a portion of it. And so we want to keep sort of the darkness and the edge and the villainy, I guess, to go back to that, is in the adventure path to a certain extent, so that we don't want to use up all of our stories, I guess. Let's see. Do either of the two of you, since you both worked on Bloodlords, I did as well. What do you think? TRDG11 asks, what's the difference between playing an undead compared to playing somebody who's alive in one of these adventure paths? And I know, real quick, for one of mine is that it's not so much that if you're playing undead, it's a different thing. It's that if you're playing specific kinds of undead, because in my adventure, you've got Cortash Kane, who was basically the king of the ghouls. And so if you're playing a ghoul, that's sort of like meeting, in theory, one of your heroes. And you have your own motivation to, get his attention or to make him happy or something like that. So it's a case where I guess to expand it a little bit, when you're playing undead, the sort of NPCs in the world that you normally would want to fight against, or the ones you want to make friends with, are inverted. So that's one of the intriguing things for me, is that it lets us present characters like Cortash Kane less as combat challenges and more as role-playing challenges.
I think throughout the course of this adventure path, there are lots of opportunities where being undead is beneficial to you. And, that's why in my book, it was really fun. That, I assure you, if you're in those first two parts of this adventure, being undead is not really a good thing. It'll hurt. It's probably a benefit for a whole lot of the campaign, but when you are in the boneyard facing a bunch of psychopomps, no, it's not. It's a bad thing.
one of the fun things about this adventure path, I think, is, one of the laws in Geb is that if you die on Geb soil, you will be raised as an undead to serve the state. So, like, if you go into this AP and you go to the farm to investigate and you get mauled to death by one of the monsters there, that might not be the end for your character. You might be coming back as a ghoul or something like that, and continue your exciting adventures. But yeah, I'd say there are a lot of the foes are certainly undead as well. And so as an undead yourself, there might be certain effects that you find it an easier time dealing with than you otherwise would. But it sounds like we have Jessica's volume at the very least to balance out some of those positives with some pain.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's some monsters in the game that play out very differently if you are hurt by positive energy than if you are healed by positive energy, and vice versa. Some monsters that do a lot of negative energy damage become pushovers if you're healed by negative energy, and that's something that I try to do in the Ghoul's Hunger is play around with some of those monsters that normally they wouldn't be that scary, but now that just standing next to maybe hurts you or something like that, you have to approach the combat in a different way. So one of the things that we did in second edition is we've really made sure that the back matter for adventure paths is more supportive and intertwined with the adventure itself. Is there a back matter article, like a monster or an article or something from the toolbox that you are especially hyped for? Let's go with you first, Jessica.
Yeah, the big article I got to write on Naracus was my favorite thing I got to put in this whole book. Naracus is a psychopomp. They are a psychopomp usher of atonement, of difficult choices, of pain, of personal transformation, and they facilitate change for souls. They were not an easy outsider to write about. Not at all. It is the kind of deity that needs to be handled with care. But I also really enjoyed it. Naracus cares about healing, of taking damaged and incomplete souls who have been partially consumed, for example, and helping heal them until their soul is whole enough to be fairly judged. They judge souls who straddle the lines between good and evil or law and chaos. Think of souls like someone who has committed an atrocity to protect an innocent, or someone willing to sacrifice for the greater good. Villains who might perform heroic deeds for purely self-serving reasons, right? These are the kinds of things that Naracus watches over. They facilitate change, like personal transformations and transitions. And just tackling that in this article was really a lot of fun. It was a challenge, but I really liked it, and I'm really proud of how it turned out. And it is, in mine, you get to enter the borders kind of Naracus's realm when you do enter the Boneyard. And yeah, I won't spoil any more on that, but it was really fun to work on. Also, not really in a back matter article, well, sort of. One of my favorite parts of writing adventures is getting to put in fun characters. For me, what makes an adventure isn't necessarily the thing you do or the place you do it in, which are very important, obviously, but it's those random characters that you end up coming across that your PCs latch onto or things like that. And I had a lot of fun trying to make sure to include those kinds of characters in this one as well.
Awesome. All right, we got about a minute left. Mike, let's...
I can do it in a minute. Yeah. My next favorite thing to write after adventures is monsters. And in Pathfinder Society, sometimes we have new monsters, but not a lot. So I think one of my favorite things in the back matter is a monster I created. It was inspired by the City of Bones and thinking about what kind of monsters would be there. And I was looking through other bestiaries and saw the Tooth Fairy, and which in Galarian is a monster that pulls teeth out. And I went beyond that and thought about, well, what other kind of monster inspired by that could I create? So I'm not going to spoil what it is because you encounter it in the adventure and might have a bad time when you meet it. But it's mean, it's cute, it is deadly, and I love it very much.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Jessica, for helping me talk about Pathfinder Adventures Ahead. I guess in closing, I'm not allowed, I guess, to spoil the next 2 adventure paths and the next standalone adventure, but I'm going to give out 3 keywords that are associated with these 3 in no particular order: rust, worms, and spiders. So take that how you will to start imagining where we're going in the later half of 2023 with our standalone adventure and the adventure paths. And I guess we'll have more to say about the rusty spiders and worms and all that stuff sometime between now and next Gen Con. So thanks again, and have a good Gen Con, everyone.